The company's headquarters gleamed with polished glass walls and marble floors, a place where ambition walked tall in designer suits. But hidden beneath the surface of that corporate empire was a truth no one dared to speak aloud. The employees only saw their CEO at board meetings and press conferences, a man dressed in authority, unreachable, respected, sometimes even feared. Yet what they didn't know was that he was about to step into their world in a way they could never imagine. He had built the empire with his own hands, years of sacrifice, years of loyalty, years of decisions that kept thousands of families fed. But recently, whispers had reached his ears. Whispers of arrogance, corruption, and a culture where power was being abused at the expense of those at the bottom. To him, reports and surveys weren't enough. He wanted to see it, feel it, live it. And so, in the stillness of the night, he made a choice that would change not only his company, but his own understanding of the people working within it. The next morning, the man who usually arrived in a chauffeur-driven car came through the back door of the building. His hair was slightly unkempt, his clothes a little too large, and in his hand he carried a mop. The guards didn't even recognize him. The CEO of a billion-dollar company had vanished, replaced by an aging janitor who looked like he'd spent his life scrubbing floors no one cared to walk on. As he walked through the corridors, people barely looked at him. The same employees who used to stand straight when he entered a meeting room now brushed past him as if he didn't exist. He noticed the coldness of their eyes, the weight of their hurry, the way they spoke differently when they thought no one important was listening. To them, he was invisible, and that invisibility gave him the power to see everything. In the cafeteria, he overheard managers laughing at the struggles of those below them. In the break room, he saw workers too afraid to complain about faulty equipment. On the office floor, he watched people staying long after hours, working until their eyes burned, while their supervisors slipped away to expensive dinners. Every corner whispered secrets, and he absorbed them all silently, like a man collecting fragments of a shattered mirror. But it wasn't just cruelty or neglect that he discovered. He also found stories of resilience, like the young assistant who stayed late to cover for a colleague whose mother was sick, or the janitorial staff who worked double shifts just to pay for their children's schooling. These people were the real heartbeat of the company, the ones whose names were never mentioned in glossy reports, but whose sacrifices kept the entire machine running. The CEO felt a storm growing inside him. It wasn't anger alone, it was disappointment, sorrow, and a kind of pain he hadn't felt in years. This company was his legacy, his life's work. And yet, standing there in cheap overalls with sweat dripping down his forehead, he realized he was more connected to the janitors, the assistants, the forgotten workers than he was to the executives in polished shoes. One afternoon, he was cleaning near the executive offices when he overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. A group of senior managers were gathered around, mocking the very policies he had put in place to protect workers. They laughed about cutting corners, about squeezing people for more work while paying them less. One even said, "As long as the old man in the top floor believes our reports, we can do whatever we want." The old man. They were talking about him. The CEO's jaw clenched as he held his mop tighter, forcing himself not to reveal who he really was. That night, sitting alone in the janitor's closet with the faint smell of cleaning chemicals filling the air, he wrote down everything he had seen. Each injustice, each act of cruelty, each moment of kindness, page after page of truth. His disguise had given him access to a world no report, no meeting, no financial statement could ever reveal. And with every note he wrote, his determination grew stronger. He wasn't just going undercover to watch. He was preparing for something bigger, something that would shake the very foundations of his company. Days turned into weeks. The janitor everyone ignored was always there, quietly sweeping floors, carrying buckets, and wiping glass doors. Yet behind his tired eyes was a man absorbing every detail, every face, every word. Employees began to share their real feelings around him, never realizing they were speaking to the most powerful man in the building. He heard stories of favoritism, intimidation, and unfair promotions. He also heard laughter, dreams, and the sound of people who still believed in hard work despite the odds. And then came the moment that sealed his decision forever. Late one evening, he saw a junior employee being humiliated by a supervisor in front of the entire office. The young man had made a small mistake, but instead of guidance, he received insults sharp enough to cut into his soul. As the supervisor walked away, leaving the employee in tears, the undercover CEO felt something shift inside him. It was no longer just about discovering the truth. It was about justice. The CEO, disguised as a janitor, realized he had enough. Enough evidence, enough stories, enough truth to confront the empire he had built. The time to reveal himself was drawing near. But before he did, he wanted to see one last thing: the reaction of his top executives when the mask finally came off. He wanted to know who would stand with him and who would fall when the truth exploded. The days of silent observation had sharpened his perspective. Each night, he left the building not as a CEO but as a weary janitor, and each night he carried with him the weight of a truth too heavy to ignore. What had started as curiosity had turned into a revelation so vast it threatened the very core of his company. He had seen arrogance dressed in authority, cruelty hidden behind polished desks, and corruption disguised as efficiency. Yet he had also seen sparks of hope, small flames of humanity struggling to survive in the shadows. Those flames deserved protection, and he was the only one who could protect them. One morning, while scrubbing the lobby floor, he overheard two senior executives laughing about cutting employee benefits. They spoke as though people were numbers, disposable, nothing more than entries on a spreadsheet. The janitor kept his head down, but his blood boiled. Every word they spoke was another nail in the coffin of the culture he had once been proud of. He realized then that this wasn't just a matter of correcting mistakes. This was a matter of rebuilding trust, of tearing down the rotting walls and laying new foundations. But timing was everything. He couldn't reveal himself yet, not until the picture was complete. He needed undeniable proof, the kind that no executive could spin or hide from. So he stayed in disguise, watching, listening, learning. He saw the young woman in accounting who was denied a promotion because she refused to flatter her supervisor. He saw the warehouse staff working in unsafe conditions, their warnings ignored. He saw the night guards sleeping on cold chairs because no one cared enough to provide them with proper facilities. Every scene cut deeper into his heart, carving a wound that only justice could heal. The CEO had always believed in merit, in the power of hard work. But standing in those corridors with a mop in hand, he realized that merit meant nothing if it was suffocated by favoritism and fear. And so he began to plan, not just to reveal himself, but to confront the system head-on. He imagined the faces of his board members when they discovered that the janitor they had ignored was the very man who signed their paychecks. He imagined the silence that would fall across the room when he laid out the evidence he had gathered. He imagined the moment when the powerless would finally have a voice. One evening, while cleaning the conference room after a late meeting, he came across a folder left behind on the table. Inside were documents detailing secret deals and hidden expenses, proof that some executives were siphoning money for personal gain. The janitor in him should have walked away, but the CEO in him knew this was the kind of evidence that could bring everything crashing down. He carefully noted every detail, committing names and figures to memory. The final puzzle pieces were falling into place. The more he saw, the more his heart ached for the people who had placed their trust in him. He thought of the receptionist who greeted everyone with a smile despite her modest salary. He thought of the delivery staff who worked through storms to keep the company running. He thought of the cleaners who scrubbed the floors until their hands cracked, just so the offices could shine for the executives who never thanked them. These people deserved recognition, not neglect. And soon they would have it. But not everyone was cruel. There were still leaders within his company who carried integrity in their hearts. He noticed a mid-level manager who always defended his team, shielding them from unnecessary pressure. He saw a supervisor quietly paying for an employee's medical bills when the company refused to cover them. These small acts of kindness gave him hope. They reminded him that his company wasn't beyond saving. It just needed to be rebuilt from the inside out. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon. He was mopping the corridor when he saw a young intern cornered by two senior staff members. They mocked him, ridiculed him for his lack of experience, and told him he would never make it in the company. The intern's eyes filled with tears, but he held them back, whispering a soft thank you before walking away. The janitor watched the scene unfold with a clenched jaw, his heart breaking. That in turn reminded him of his younger self, the boy who once walked into an office with nothing but dreams and determination. In that moment, the CEO knew the time for observation was over. The time for action had come. That night, he returned to his office, not as a janitor, but as himself. Dressed once again in his tailored suit, he looked into the mirror and saw both sides of who he was. The man of power and the man of humility. The one who gave orders and the one who carried them out. He realized he needed both identities to truly lead. The janitor had shown him the truth. The CEO would now deliver the justice. He called for an emergency board meeting. No one knew why, but rumors spread quickly. The executives arrived, confident and unaware, laughing about bonuses and vacations. They didn't notice the faint traces of cleaning chemicals still lingering on his hands, or the exhaustion in his eyes from weeks of labor. All they saw was the CEO, the man they thought they had fooled. As the meeting began, he stood at the head of the long table, his gaze steady. He didn't start with charts or financial reports. Instead, he began to speak about the people, the janitors, the assistants, the workers no one respected. He told their stories, their struggles, their sacrifices. At first, the executives shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another with faint smirks. But as he continued, their smirks faded. The words cut deeper than any financial statement could. Then he opened the folder, the one filled with proof of corruption, negligence, and betrayal. He laid it on the table for all to see, each page a dagger of truth. The room fell silent. The air grew heavy. And for the first time, the executives realized the man they had underestimated was not blind to their actions. He looked each of them in the eye, his voice calm but unshakable. "I have walked these halls not as your CEO, but as your janitor. I have seen who you truly are when you believe no one is watching. And now, the time has come for this company to face the truth." The room erupted into chaos, voices raised, excuses thrown across the table, panic settling into the hearts of those who thought they were untouchable. But the CEO stood still, unmoved, his presence commanding the room like a storm waiting to break. This was no longer just a company meeting. This was a reckoning. And it was only the beginning. The boardroom was still trembling with the echoes of chaos. Executives who once walked with unshakable confidence now sat in silence, their faces pale, their voices stripped of arrogance. The man they had mocked as the old man on the top floor had just dismantled their illusions in a single stroke. But the CEO wasn't finished. The truth he had uncovered wasn't just for the board. It was for the entire company, the thousands of men and women whose loyalty had been betrayed by greed and corruption. He dismissed the board with a firm hand, leaving them to wrestle with the weight of their actions. Some left in anger, some in shame, and a few in quiet reflection. But he remained calm, his mind fixed on the next step. This wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. He had spent weeks living as the invisible worker, the janitor who blended into the background. Now it was time for him to stand in the light, not for himself, but for the people whose stories had given him strength. The following morning, a company-wide announcement was made. Every employee was summoned to the central hall, a space large enough to hold the beating heart of the corporation. Workers whispered nervously as they gathered, clerks, assistants, guards, janitors, managers, all wondering what could possibly demand such an urgent assembly. When the CEO finally walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Many had only seen him from a distant figure of authority. But today, something was different. Today, he stood not as the unreachable man in a suit, but as someone who had walked among them in silence. He looked out at the sea of faces, some tired, some curious, some indifferent, and he began to speak. His voice carried not just authority, but sincerity, the kind that demanded attention without force. "For weeks," he said, I have not been the man you thought I was. I have not sat behind a desk, nor have I entered through the front doors. I have walked these halls as one of you, carrying the weight of a mop, wearing the uniform you barely notice. I have seen the truth of this company not from the top, but from the floor on which you stand. A ripple of disbelief spread through the crowd. Gasps echoed as people looked at one another, trying to grasp the meaning of his words. The janitor they had ignored, the man who mopped the floors, was standing before them as their CEO. He continued, his gaze steady, his words cutting through the air like a blade of truth. I saw the struggles you endure in silence. I heard the laughter of those who mock your efforts. I witnessed the sacrifices you make every single day, the sacrifices that build this company. And I also saw the corruption, the arrogance, and the abuse of power that has poisoned our culture. That ends today. The crowd leaned forward, their hearts pounding, their breaths held. For the first time, they felt seen. For the first time, they felt that someone at the top understood their reality. The CEO raised the folder of evidence, the pages filled with secrets that had once been hidden in shadows. This is not just paper. This is proof. Proof that some who sit in positions of power have failed you. Proof that trust was broken. But hear me clearly, this company does not belong to them. It belongs to you. It always has. The hall erupted in applause, a thunderous wave of emotion that swept through the crowd. But he lifted his hand, silencing them once more. Applause will not change this company. Action will. Starting today, there will be accountability. Those who abuse their power will be removed, no matter their title. Those who worked in silence will be recognized, no matter how small their role may seem. And from this day forward, dignity will not be a word we write on posters. It will be the foundation on which we stand. Tears welled up in the eyes of employees who had long felt invisible. For years, they had carried burdens in silence, convinced their voices would never reach the top. But now their stories had not only been heard, they were being acted upon. The CEO wasn't just promising change, he was delivering it in real time. One by one, he named the individuals who had been caught in corruption. Executives who had stolen, managers who had abused their power, leaders who had mocked the very people they were meant to serve. Their names echoed through the hall like a list of fallen idols. Some protested, some hung their heads, and others walked out in shame. The employees watched in stunned silence, realizing that justice was unfolding before their very eyes. But the CEO didn't stop there. He also named those whose quiet acts of kindness had gone unnoticed: the supervisor who paid medical bills, the assistant who sacrificed her time to help a colleague, the janitors who worked endless shifts to provide for their families. He called them to the stage, honoring them publicly, giving them the recognition they had deserved all along. The hall shook with applause, this time not for power, but for humility, for courage, for humanity. The CEO's voice softened as he delivered his final words. This company is more than numbers, more than buildings, more than profits. It is people. People who give their sweat, their time, their hearts. From this day on, we rise together. Not as executives and workers, not as the powerful and the powerless, but as one family. And as long as I stand here as your leader, I will never forget the lessons I learned when I walked these halls as your janitor. The crowd stood to their feet, the hall erupting with cheers and tears. For the first time in years, the company felt alive, not with fear, but with hope. The CEO stepped back, his heart heavy with everything he had seen, but lighter now with the knowledge that change was finally taking root. He had disguised himself to see the truth, and the truth had set his company free. In the days that followed, the effects rippled through every corner of the organization. The corrupt were replaced with leaders of integrity. Policies were rewritten to protect and uplift. Recognition programs were launched to honor the unseen heroes. The walls of the company no longer echoed with fear. They resonated with dignity. And though the CEO returned to his suit and his office, he never forgot the lessons of the mop and bucket. He never forgot the faces of those who worked in silence. And every time he walked through the halls, employees no longer looked past him. They looked at him, with respect, with trust, with belief. because now they knew that their leader was not just a man of power, but a man who had walked in their shoes. The story spread beyond the walls of the company. Newspapers carried the tale of the CEO who went undercover as a janitor, and the world listened. Other corporations took notice. People everywhere were reminded that true leadership isn't about sitting at the top. It's about understanding the bottom. And so, the legacy of the CEO was not the empire he built, nor the profits he earned, but the dignity he restored. A dignity that burned brighter than glass towers, louder than boardroom applause, stronger than power itself. The janitor was gone, but the lessons he revealed would never be forgotten.